Well, we got the Y done. Let's do the X next. Stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Scott, Edge of 3D, and back on the Milo Mini Mill. The last episode we built the Y-axis, which got it right here. I did make a comment at the end of that video that I thought this cable chain connector here was wrong. I was wrong. It's the correct one. And as you can see, I've got the cable chain on there, but everything's on here and working now. So next we're going to build the X-axis, which rides on these right here and works like this. So this is the front of the mill. This will be the cross slide table. So that's what we're going to do next. I've already got everything all laid out here on the bench, all the different parts it's going to need for it. And as usual, I've already put in all the heat set inserts that's needed for everything here. Kind of prepared everything ahead of time, all the different parts laying around and stuff. Now, one thing I did notice in the instructions that I need to point out is when you get down here to start putting the table together, right here it calls for 2080 500 millimeter. That's actually 2040s. So if you go digging through your box looking for 500 millimeter long 2080s, you're not going to find them. But we'll get started right here with this C channel and getting the rail put on. As you see here, it's showing 6 screws per side, starting at each end, skipping every other hole. So we're going to go by what they call for in the directions. And let's go ahead and get our rail out here, get one rail out here so we can get everything positioned. Now, for me personally, I'd really like to see another M3 right here in the center. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop it in there and hope that there's enough extra hardware that we don't run short somewhere else in the build. But that way it's even spacing, even tension on the rail all the way from one end to the other. We don't have a big gap in the center where there's no securement. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put the M3x10s in here. It recommends you Loctite stuff like this, but just as in the same with the Y-axis, I'm not going to Loctite it at this point in case I have to come back in and put shims under any of the rail or something like that. Once I've got the machine all trammed and I'm happy with it, then I'll come back through and Loctite everything. Okay, so now that I've got all the screws started, I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to get the rail centering guides. Snap onto each rail, just like so. Then I'm going to stand the rail up like this and tap these down so that they're good and flush. In fact, on something like this, it might not even hurt to set these up on a 1, 2, 3 block. And then I'll just use my 3D printed hammer. Try to get this over here where the camera can pick it up a little better. And just tap those down. Make sure they're good and flush to the block down here. And then I'm going to tighten up, snug up one rail, and then I'm simply going to snug one end of the other rail, and I'm going to leave the rest of them loose. That way when we slide the carriage on there, it's got a little wiggle. Now it calls for putting these bearings in at this point, and I don't do that. because when you're moving these around, the bearings will fall out. So we'll go ahead and mount, looks like it's this one here, which is a modified part with the LDO kit. It's in their printed files. It's got this extra little tab that sticks out here that the original one doesn't have. And then actually, yeah, that's the one we're mounting on first. And it calls for M5 by 12s. And we will go ahead and Loctite these. If you remember in the last video, I showed you how I do the Loctiting. Let me move this out of the way. I take my blue Loctite. Use an old bag or anything. I've even used old playing cards, or, you know, the playing cards you get at the casino that they cut the corners off of. Those work great for doing Loctite. Like I've explained before, where we are going through ABS, ASA, any kind of plastic, we don't want to leave a big glob of Loctite on there so that when we shove it down in there, it drags it all off and gets it up under the head of the screw, because Loctite has a tendency to react with the plastic. So I'm just going to go ahead and get that inserted like that. Get those torqued down. And the next step, we put on the 2040 500 millimeter wings. All right, let's see what it asks for next. Now we are going to do all of these. So it's these pieces here. There's two centers and then the ends. And the center ones have the wider boss here. The ends are the skinnier ones. And these are all M5 by 12s. They use M5 roll-ins, M5 by 12 screws. And I'm going to go through and get all of the heat sets in. We'll do one side at a time. Not heat sets, roll-ins. We'll do one side at a time. So flip it up like this. Set it up on some 1, 2, 3 blocks so that it's stable. We'll go ahead and get our 9 heats or roll-ins in here, and then do our 9 roll-ins down here, and I'll come back through and put all the screws in. We'll do both sides. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through this. If I run into any problems, I'll stop, but otherwise we'll just fast forward through this. Okay, that's got them all inserted. Go through here now. Make sure they're all tightened down. Don't go just reefing down on these right here, because you will crush the plastic. Okay, let's see what we got next here. Once it's slide it onto the Y carriage. And this is where we got to be very, very careful. Once again, let me get this up out of the way. I'm going to bring this over. I'll set it like this. So you got to make sure you have your dummy rails in here. If you try sliding that in either direction without the dummy rails, you stand a really good chance of knocking the balls out of there. You turn this like this. It's two right here. I don't know how well the camera's picking that up. Butt them up against the rails and just start to gently push them on. Any resistance, anything doesn't feel right, stop, back up, and try again. All right, we got our first one on. Now we'll go through here. Same way on the second side, gently. Anything doesn't feel right, stop, back up, go again. There we go. We now have that on there. Now we got to build the lead screw. Really simple. Motor. You find a coupler here. Motor, 8mm hole here that goes into the lead screw, or the lead screw goes into. So you just put it on there and go ahead and torque it down. Insert the lead screw in till it bottoms. Might have to loosen it up just a little bit. That's the case on this one. It's bottomed out, tighten it down. There we go. That's your lead screw set up. Now we're going to thread that in from this end down here, but I'm going to flip this over to do it. Now, if you remember back in the last video, we went ahead and set the preload on this axis. So when you get to the other side of it, it's going to be a little bit difficult to start through there. And in the case of this one, it's just flat not going to go. So we're going to back this off here a little bit, and I'm going to reach in there and loosen up these screws, which are going to be a little tough because they do have Loctite on them. We'll go ahead and see. Yep. She is not allowing it to go. So we'll go ahead and pull the screws out of this side completely since it's the easiest one to access. We'll get the lead screw in there and then we'll come back and preload it. There we go. As soon as I took the screws out completely, it just threaded right in. Now we don't want to slide the carriages off the end of the rail. There we go. We're good there. And M5x20s into the motor. We'll go ahead and get the motor locked in. Those are M5x20 socket heads. These right here. And this is screwing into heat sets. We still want to use a little bit of blue Loctite on them. All right, let's see what they say next. I'm sure it's going to be putting the other end on. It is, but we want to set the preload in that bearing block first. What I'm doing, and it's going to be almost impossible for the camera to pick up and see, right down in here I want to make sure these top and bottom holes are lined up with the threaded insert. We'll go ahead and add a new drop of Loctite to the M3 screws, start them back down in there, and I'm just going to work them down evenly until I get the right amount of tension on it, because right now this thing will almost freewheel. It will freewheel, which is great, but that's a little too loose for CNC machining. I'm going to bring it out here where the carriages are right at the end. I'm going to stop before the carriages start to come off. Then I'm going to get in there and get the screws started. Now I'm just going to take with my thumb here and kind of feel the resistance, and also take and just back and forth on here and see if there's any play. I can roll the coupler by hand. Resistance feels about right. When I try this, there's no play. So we're going to call that good. Now we'll go on to the next step here, which is putting the other end on. And I didn't preload the bearings into it yet, but I will now. Okay, here we are in post-production, and we're having to do voiceover because right here, when I switch scenes, and it muted it. So it did not record from this point on the audio, it just recorded video. On this end piece here, we're going to need one regular bearing and two flange bearings. That's the two flange bearings there. And we'll go ahead and we'll get these bearings preloaded into that printed piece. There's a flange bearing. Then we'll drop a regular bearing down in there and then put a flange bearing on the top. Now, before we slide that on there, we also need a couple of locking collars. So we're going to take one locking collar, slide that up on the threaded shaft, the lead screw. And now before we can get that slid, the end piece slid on there, we're going to have to raise it up off the desk a little bit because with it sitting flat down on the table, those end pieces stick down just a little bit. It'll be a little difficult to slide it on there. So just use 1, 2, 3 blocks, slide it up, run the Y-axis a little way so that it kind of balances out because that big heavy stepper hanging off one side, it wants to flop around. And we'll just slide that up onto the lead screw. And at this point, we'll want to get 6 M5, and then we'll go ahead and put some Loctite on, and we will secure that into the table on the X-axis. Then we're going to take and slide the outer collar on, and then reach in there with your fingers, squeeze them as tight as you can. And then we'll take and go ahead and tighten one set screw down on the inner, tighten one set screw down on the outer, and then we'll roll it a quarter turn, and we'll tighten the other 2 set screws. Up next, it talks about installing the cable chain. Very easy. 3 screws in each one, and then the cable chain mounts on there. The cable chain that came with mine, I don't remember if it was the long one or the little bit shorter one, but it worked out perfectly on length. You might have to play with the length on the cable chain just a little bit in order to get it exactly the way you want it. I'm going to try to flip this up here and get it where the camera can get a good shot on it, which this thing is getting really heavy and really hard to flop around at this point. Prop it back up on some 1, 2, 3 blocks, and then we're going to have to move that axis quite a ways down, and the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and put the hand wheel on there. I already did the heat sets on these. It's M3 heat sets that attach it to the shaft, and there's an M5 screw that goes through the handle. What I did on that is I just ran the M5 screw in through the handle, put a little bit of Loctite on it, tightened it down, and then backed it off about a quarter turn so the handle freewheels on there, but it won't sit there and spin the bolt back out. Here we'll just take our M3 by 10s or 12s. I don't remember which I used on this. And we'll go ahead and lock the hand wheels on there. Now these are the hand wheels that are on the LDO supplemental print STLs. Works exactly the same as the others. These are just a little bit different design, and they have a knurled outside on them. And that makes it so much easier to move the axes. As you can see, I'll bring it back until it's just about balanced on there, and it'll set up on the 1, 2, 3 blocks a little bit. We'll grab the cable chain here. And the cable chain uses the M3 by 6 flathead cap screws. I believe they're called FHCS. And there's just 3 on each end. Will wind up having to pop one end off and flip it around, which I'm doing right here. Sorry, it's coming off screen. But you can carefully pry that link open on the cable chain, pop that out, flip it around the other way, pop it back on there. And here I'll prop it up so you can actually see where it screws on. A little difficult to do because it doesn't want to stand up like that, and that's just the way I have my camera set up. There's the M3x6 screw. The last 3 screws in the other end of the cable chain, rather than sitting there trying to balance it up in the air. And there you go. Clean a little Loctite off the wheel where I rolled it through the bag that I had the Loctite on. And as bad as I am at doing voiceover, I'm even worse at karaoke and lip syncing. So when we switch to the next scene, where I'm back on camera, we're just going to pause it with that up in the air. And at this point, we'll say, as always, I appreciate each and every one of you that take the time to watch these videos. If you like them, hit that thumbs up button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when the next video comes out, hit that bell icon. And I can't say it enough, I really appreciate each and every one of you that take the time to watch these, especially all the way to the end. And as always, peace out.